They arrested him in chains, a decorated black Marine who had risked his life for the very country that now humiliated him. But in the middle of that crowded courtroom, when everyone thought he was broken, a 4-star general stood tall, raised his hand, and saluted the man in shackles. That single moment changed everything. Welcome to BrainFuel, the channel where powerful true stories meet inspiration. Here, we bring you tales of courage, resilience, and justice that remind us what it really means to stand tall in the face of adversity. If you believe stories have the power to change hearts and fuel minds, you're in the right place. Let's dive in. Put your hands behind your back. The command was sharp, cold, and final. It wasn't shouted in the middle of a war zone, nor whispered during a dangerous covert mission. No, it was barked in the middle of an ordinary American street on a quiet Saturday morning. People had just stepped out for coffee. Some were carrying grocery bags. Others were walking their dogs. Nobody expected to witness what was about to unfold. The man standing frozen in front of the officers wasn't some unknown figure. He wasn't a stranger or a face easily forgotten. He was Marcus Daniels, a man the community recognized, not for crime or trouble, but for his bravery. Marcus wasn't just another veteran. He was a decorated black Marine who had bled, fought, and nearly died serving his country. And now, unbelievably, he was being treated like a criminal. The first set of steel handcuffs clicked loudly around his wrists. The sound was sharp, echoing through the street. People stopped mid-step. A woman holding her toddler gasped. A young man filming on his phone whispered, "Wait, isn't that him? Isn't that the Marine hero?" Yes, it was the very same Marcus Daniels, whose picture once appeared in the local newspaper, smiling with a group of soldiers after returning from a dangerous mission overseas. The same Marcus who had spoken at schools, telling kids about discipline, courage, and service. The same man who had buried friends in uniform, folded flags, and stood proudly at military parades. Yet in this moment, none of that seemed to matter. To the officers, he was just another suspect. They held his arms tight, shoved him toward the squad car, and pushed his head down as they forced him inside. The crowd watching couldn't believe their eyes. "Why are they arresting him?" someone muttered. "He saved people's lives in Afghanistan, didn't he?" another asked. "This doesn't make sense," an older man said, shaking his head. Phones were out everywhere. Videos were already streaming to social media. Within minutes, the images spread like wildfire. A Marine hero shackled in chains. But Marcus himself? He didn't resist. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He didn't try to explain. He simply stood tall, his eyes steady, his face calm. Years of military discipline kept him composed. He had been trained to face chaos without panic, to stand steady under pressure. Even though humiliation burned inside him, he refused to let the world see weakness. Deep down, though, Marcus felt something far heavier than the cold metal biting into his wrists. Betrayal. He had once believed in the promise of America, that a man who served with honor would be respected at home. He had believed that sacrifice meant something, that putting his life on the line for strangers halfway across the globe would count for something when he returned. And now here he was, arrested, accused, dragged through the streets as though none of his service mattered. As the police car door slammed shut, the crowd outside grew louder. Some demanded answers. Others cursed in disbelief. A little boy holding his mother's hand asked, "Mom, why are they arresting the soldier?" The mother, her voice breaking, replied, "I don't know, baby. I don't know." Inside the car, Marcus sat silently. His broad shoulders filled the back seat, his wrists stiff against the cuffs. The engine started, and the car pulled away, leaving behind a stunned community. He thought back to the battlefield, to nights under the stars, the sound of helicopters slicing through the dark sky, the feeling of sandstorms battering his face. He thought of the brothers he had lost, the ones who would never see home again. He thought of the countless moments when he had stared death in the eye, and survived. All of it seemed unreal compared to this. He had faced enemies armed with rifles and explosives. Now he faced the judgment of his own neighbors, recorded on cell phones, replayed endlessly online. To many watching, Marcus was still a hero. But to the system that had just arrested him, he was nothing more than a man in handcuffs. By the time the car reached the station, the internet was already ablaze. Hashtags with his name trended. News outlets scrambled for information. Decorated Marine arrested flashed across TV screens. Talk shows speculated. Was it a mistake? Was he guilty of something? Was this a misunderstanding or a story of injustice? Marcus was led inside the station, booked, fingerprinted, and placed in a holding cell. The harsh fluorescent lights buzzed above his head. The cold bench beneath him felt unfamiliar, colder than anything he had known in the desert overseas. In his mind, he repeated the same thought: I gave everything for my country, and this is how I'm treated at home. Meanwhile, outside the station, the crowd only grew larger. Protesters carried signs. Veterans gathered, furious that one of their own was being humiliated this way. Mothers who had lost sons in uniform spoke up for Marcus. Even people who had never met him felt outraged. The story was no longer just about Marcus Daniels. It was about something bigger: respect, dignity, and the question of how America treated its heroes. But for Marcus himself, sitting quietly in that cell, the noise of the world outside didn't reach him. All he could hear was the echo of that first command: put your hands behind your back, and the weight of injustice pressing down on his shoulders. And little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a story that would shake a courtroom, silence a judge, and make a general salute a man in shackles. The night Marcus Daniels was locked away, he sat on the cold bench of the holding cell, staring at the walls. His mind wasn't on his situation, not at first. His thoughts drifted back to battlefield, to the hot deserts of the Middle East, the smell of smoke and gunpowder, the sound of helicopters roaring overhead, and the weight of responsibility he had carried as a Marine leader. Marcus wasn't just any soldier. He was the man they sent when things got tough. He had led missions where the odds were impossible, where a wrong move could cost dozens of lives. He wasn't reckless, but he was brave enough to do what needed to be done when others hesitated. The medals he earned weren't just decorations. Each one had a story, a mission, a risk, a moment of courage. One medal represented the time he carried a wounded Marine for nearly a mile under enemy fire. Another marked a mission where he saved a trapped unit, guiding them through gunfire in the dead of night. His body carried scars from those battles, reminders of bullets, shrapnel, and the weight of survival. To his brothers in uniform, Marcus was a hero. To his community, he was a role model. He had returned home not to brag about his service, but to inspire young people. He spoke at schools about discipline and resilience. He mentored kids who felt lost. He reminded them that courage wasn't about being fearless. It was about doing the right thing even when you were afraid. But all of that seemed invisible the night of the incident that changed everything. It happened at a small neighborhood convenience store. Marcus had only gone there to grab a bottle of water and some snacks after a long run. He wasn't wearing his uniform. He wasn't carrying medals or ribbons. He was just Marcus, a tall, strong man in a hoodie and sweatpants. Inside the store, he noticed something immediately: a teenage boy cornered by a larger man near the back shelves. The boy's body language screamed fear. His hands were shaking, his eyes darting toward the door as if searching for a way out. The man towering over him shoved him lightly at first, then harder, his voice raised in threats. Marcus didn't need the full story. He didn't need to know every detail. He could read the fear, the imbalance of power. His instincts, the same instincts that had saved lives overseas, kicked in. "Hey!" Marcus said firmly, stepping closer. His voice carried authority without shouting. "Back off." The man turned, irritated. "Mind your business," he snapped. But Marcus didn't back down. He stepped between the man and the teenager, his presence enough to make the aggressor pause. Marcus didn't throw a punch, didn't raise his fists, didn't even touch the man at first. He simply stood there, a wall between predator and prey. The situation could have ended there, if not for pride. The man, embarrassed at being confronted, shoved Marcus. It was a mistake. Marcus reacted with trained precision, grabbing the man's arm, twisting it just enough to immobilize him, and pushing him back without excessive force. It was the same maneuver he'd used 100 times in training, designed to stop aggression without causing unnecessary harm. The teenager slipped out of the corner, wide-eyed and trembling. But by then, the store clerk had already called the police, frightened by the escalating voices and sudden commotion. When the officers arrived, they didn't see a Marine protecting a teenager. They didn't see a man preventing violence. They saw Marcus, a strong black man, holding another man by the arm. To them, it looked like aggression. The aggressor, desperate to save face, wasted no time. "He attacked me," he shouted, clutching his arm as if it were broken. "I didn't do anything. He just came at me." Marcus tried to explain, calmly, clearly. "I was protecting the kid. Ask the boy. Ask anyone who saw." But the boy had run off, terrified. The clerk hadn't seen the whole thing, only the end. And the officers, eager to resolve the situation quickly, made their choice. They arrested Marcus. To the officers, it was paperwork, another disturbance handled. But to Marcus, it was a crushing blow. He had spent years in service, risking his life for strangers in distant lands. And now, in his own neighborhood, he was treated like the villain. Word spread quickly. The headlines were brutal. Decorated Marine arrested for assault. Local hero in handcuffs. The community was split. Some who knew Marcus personally rushed to defend him, insisting there had to be more to the story. Others, who only saw the headlines, judged him immediately. Online debates raged. Was this an example of the justice system failing a veteran? Or was Marcus guilty of losing control? Sitting in the jail cell that night, Marcus didn't feel anger. Not yet. What he felt was disappointment. Deep, heavy disappointment. "I fought for freedom overseas," he whispered to himself, his voice barely audible over the buzzing lights. "And here at home, I'm treated like this." He thought about the boy he had tried to protect. Where was he now? Did he even realize the man who had stepped in for him was now behind bars? Would he come forward? Or would Marcus face the consequences alone? By morning, reporters were outside the courthouse. Protesters gathered, holding signs demanding his release. Veterans groups issued statements, calling the arrest an insult to every man and woman who had served. But Marcus knew the truth. Whatever he had done, no matter how noble his intentions, the law would decide his fate. The battlefield was behind him now. His new fight would not be with rifles and soldiers, but in a courtroom, a place where his honor, his service, and his character would all be tested. And this time, his enemy wasn't a foreign adversary. It was a system that seemed blind to the difference between right and wrong. The courthouse was overflowing the morning of Marcus Daniels' hearing. Reporters crowded the steps, their cameras flashing like strobe lights. Protesters waved handmade signs, "Free our hero and justice for Marcus." Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder, some in uniform, some in civilian clothes, but all united in silent solidarity. The buzz of conversation filled the air like static. Everyone was waiting for one man, the Marine hero now labeled an assailant. Inside the courthouse, the tension was thicker than smoke. Court officers lined the walls, their faces stern, as though they expected the building itself might erupt into chaos. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee, but beneath it hung something heavier, anticipation. Marcus was led to the side entrance, shackled at the wrists and ankles. His plain prison uniform contrasted sharply with the military dignity people associated with him. No medals, no ribbons, no uniform, just gray cloth and chains. But even stripped of everything, Marcus carried himself with a quiet strength. His back was straight, his eyes focused forward. He didn't shuffle like a defeated man. He walked with a steady discipline of Marine, every step measured, his dignity unbroken. The moment he entered, the room fell into silence. Reporters craned their necks. Protesters pressed closer to the glass outside the doors. Veterans rose to their feet instinctively, almost as if standing at attention. The judge, an older man with sharp eyes and a heavy gavel, looked down at Marcus. "Order in the court," he commanded, though the silence already spoke louder than any noise. The prosecutor wasted no time. He painted Marcus as a man who would let his training and temper get the better of him. "The defendant," he said firmly, pacing before the jury, "is a highly trained Marine, but that training makes him more dangerous, not less. What happened in that convenience store was not self-defense. It was unnecessary aggression. Mr. Daniels used force against a man who posed no real threat. Heroes don't get to decide the law. And in this courtroom, no one is above the law. His words hung in the air like a blade. Some nodded. Others whispered angrily. Marcus's lawyer, however, stood calmly. She was a sharp, confident woman named Evelyn Grant, known for her fiery defense of veterans. She walked to the center of the room, her heels echoing against the wooden floor. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," she began, her voice steady but passionate. "The man you see before you is not a criminal. He is a protector. He has spent his life defending this country, defending people he has never even met. And on that night in that store, he did what he has always done. He protected the vulnerable. He stepped in to stop a teenager from being harmed. He used no more force than was necessary. He did not attack. He defended." She paused, letting her words sink in. "Ask yourself, is this how we treat those who serve? By chaining them, humiliating them, and calling them criminals when they act with courage?" The jury shifted in their seats, some avoiding her gaze, others staring intently at Marcus. Witnesses were called. The store clerk admitted he hadn't seen the beginning of the incident. "I just heard voices, saw a struggle, and got scared," he said nervously. His words didn't help Marcus. They left the story incomplete, a puzzle with missing pieces. The man who had harassed the teenager testified next. He played the role of victim perfectly. His voice trembled, his arm still wrapped in a bandage though doctors had already cleared him of any serious injury. "He just came at me," he said dramatically, pointing at Marcus. "I wasn't doing anything. I was just standing there, and he grabbed me. He twisted my arm. I thought he was going to break it. I didn't even know who he was." Murmurs filled the courtroom. Some people believed him. Others shook their heads, whispering, "Liar." Marcus's lawyer rose. "And where is the boy? The teenager who was being harassed?" she asked pointedly. The courtroom grew quiet. The man shifted uncomfortably. The prosecutor cleared his throat. "The boy has not come forward." The absence of the teenager weighed heavily in the room. Without him, Marcus's story was just his word against the other man's. When Marcus himself finally took the stand, the room leaned forward. He spoke simply, without theatrics, his voice calm and firm. "I didn't go into that store looking for trouble. I went in to buy water. I saw a young boy cornered, afraid. I saw a man putting his hands on him. I did what I would hope anyone would do. I stepped in. I didn't hit him. I didn't want to fight. I used the training I was given to stop the situation before it got worse. That's all I did." His words weren't rehearsed. They weren't polished like the prosecutor's speeches. They were raw, straightforward, and real. Still, the outcome was uncertain. The jury looked divided. The judge's expression was unreadable. And in the back of the room, the crowd shifted restlessly, waiting, watching, hoping. Then came the moment that would change everything. The heavy doors of the courtroom opened with a loud creak. Footsteps echoed, slow and deliberate. A man entered, his presence commanding instant attention. He was tall, broad-shouldered, his uniform crisp, his chest heavy with medals. His face was stern but dignified, the kind of face that had seen war and carried authority without needing to speak. A Marine general. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters rushed to capture the scene. The judge raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. The general did not head for the witness stand. He did not take a seat in the back. Instead, he walked down the aisle with purpose, each step loud against the wooden floor. His eyes never left Marcus. The courtroom, already tense, held its breath. What was he here for? Why had a general come to a simple assault hearing? Marcus sat frozen, his jaw tight, his eyes flickering with recognition. He knew this man. They had served together. The general had once commanded him on dangerous missions overseas. Their bond wasn't just professional. It was forged in the fire of war. The general stopped just a few feet from Marcus. The room was silent enough to hear a pin drop, and then, in front of the judge, the jury, the lawyers, the cameras, and the crowd, the general raised his hand sharply to his forehead. A salute. The kind of salute given only out of the deepest respect. The room erupted in gasps. The sound of boots striking polished would echo through the silent courtroom. Each step of the Marine general carried weight. Not just the weight of authority, but the weight of history, of respect, of battles fought and sacrifices made. The room seemed to shrink as he approached. Every eye locked on him, every breath held. The general stopped just a few feet away from Marcus. For a long moment, no one moved. Marcus, still in his prison uniform with chains around his wrists, sat straighter, his chest rising as though the presence of his old commander had reminded him who he truly was. And then, without a word, the general raised his right hand to his forehead. The gesture was crisp, deliberate, and flawless, the kind of salute only years of discipline could produce. The sound in the courtroom wasn't silence anymore. It was shock, gasps, whispers, the clicking of cameras as reporters scrambled to capture the moment. A salute was not something given lightly. It was not casual, not symbolic. A salute was a sacred recognition, one soldier to another, an acknowledgement of respect that even rank and titles could not tarnish. But here stood a decorated general, saluting a man in shackles. The prosecutor's mouth fell open. The defense attorney froze mid-note. The jury shifted, some of them visibly emotional, their eyes darting between Marcus and the general. The judge, who had kept a strict mask of neutrality throughout the trial, leaned forward with raised eyebrows, clearly caught off guard. Marcus didn't return the salute, not because he didn't want to, but because he couldn't. His hands were bound, his position restricted. But in his eyes, wet with emotion he fought hard to conceal, everyone saw his silent response. Finally, the general lowered his hand, turned toward the judge, and spoke with a voice that carried across the room like a command on the battlefield. "Your Honor," he said firmly, "my name is General Raymond Carter. I commanded Marcus Daniels in combat. I know this man. I trusted him with my life. And I am here to tell you that what I see today is not justice." The judge blinked, clearly taken aback. "General, you're not listed as a witness." "With respect, Your Honor," the general interrupted, his tone respectful yet immovable, "I will not sit quietly while a man like Marcus Daniels is dragged through the mud. He is a Marine. He is a hero, and he is not a criminal." The prosecutor immediately jumped up. "Objection! This is highly irregular." But the general didn't flinch. He turned slightly toward the jury. "You want to know who Marcus Daniels is? He's the man who, during an ambush overseas, carried two of his fellow Marines out of a kill zone while under heavy fire. He's the man who refused evacuation after being injured because he wouldn't leave his brothers behind. He's the man whose leadership saved more lives than I can count. That's the man you see before you." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "And now, you're being told to believe that this same man suddenly turned into a thug at a convenience store? That he assaulted an innocent man without reason? I know Marcus. He doesn't use violence recklessly. He uses it only to protect. That's who he is. That's who he has always been." The courtroom buzzed with emotion. Veterans in the back nodded fiercely, some with tears in their eyes. Members of the jury shifted uncomfortably, clearly moved by the general's words. The prosecutor tried to recover. "With all due respect, General, your stories from the battlefield are irrelevant here. This case is about civilian assault, not war." The general cut him off with a stare so sharp it could slice through stone. "Respect? Don't talk to me about respect while you accuse a man like Marcus of being a criminal for doing what he has always done, protecting those who can't protect themselves. You say it's irrelevant? It's not, because his actions that night in the store weren't random. They were the same actions that saved my men overseas. It's who he is at his core." He turned back to the judge. "And I will not stand by and let this man's honor be stripped away because of misunderstanding and a lie." The judge, visibly unsettled, cleared his throat. "General Carter, you realize you are speaking under oath, even if not formally sworn in?" "I do," the general replied without hesitation. The defense attorney, Evelyn Grant, seized a moment. She rose and addressed the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard it. A man who commanded Marcus Daniels, who saw him at his highest and lowest moments, has told you the truth. Marcus is not violent. Marcus is not reckless. Marcus is a protector. That's not the testimony of a hired witness. That's the testimony of a general who owes no one anything except the truth. Marcus sat silently, his heart pounding. The memory of the battlefield came back to him. The day General Carter had put a hand on his shoulder after a mission and said, "I trust you with my life, Daniels." Now, years later, those words were being spoken again, but this time in a courtroom instead of a war zone. The prosecutor tried once more to object, but the momentum had shifted. The jury's eyes were no longer suspicious. They were thoughtful, empathetic, even respectful. The spectators in the room were leaning forward, hanging on every word. And for the first time since his arrest, Marcus felt something he hadn't felt in days. Hope. The salute had done more than stun the courtroom. It had shifted the entire atmosphere. What had once been about guilt or innocence now became about honor and truth. The general's final words rang out like a verdict before the verdict. "I am proud to salute Marcus Daniels," he declared, "not just as his general, but as a Marine who owes him my life. And I ask this court, will you condemn a man who has given everything for his country? Or will you recognize him for who he truly is, a hero?" The courtroom erupted, gasps, murmurs, even applause from some who couldn't hold it back. The judge pounded his gavel for order, but it was too late. The image of a general saluting a man in chains was seared into everyone's memory. And from that moment, the case would never be the same again. The gavel struck hard against the wood, the sharp crack demanding silence. But silence was impossible. The energy in the courtroom had shifted so completely that even the judge seemed to struggle to contain it. The image of a Marine general saluting a man in chains had spread beyond the walls already, whispered through the crowd, texted to friends, uploaded online. The story had stopped being a legal matter and had become something much larger, a moment of truth. The judge cleared his throat, adjusting his glasses as though trying to steady himself. His voice, usually commanding, wavered slightly. "Order. This court will have order." The murmurs quieted, but the emotion in the air remained thick. Everyone, the jury, the attorneys, the spectators, and even Marcus himself, knew the tide had turned. The jury deliberated for hours, but when they returned, their decision was written on their faces before they spoke. The foreman, a middle-aged man who had avoided looking at Marcus throughout the trial, now lifted his head and met his eyes. "We find the defendant, Marcus Daniels, not guilty." The word struck like thunder. For a heartbeat, the courtroom was still, and then an eruption. Cheers burst from the back. Reporters shouted into microphones, and veterans saluted, some tears streaming down their faces. The judge banged his gavel again, but it was useless. The room was no longer under his control. Marcus closed his eyes, the weight of the verdict sinking in. For days he had lived under the shadow of chains, humiliation, and uncertainty. Now, that weight lifted, replaced with something different, not relief alone, but vindication. He had been seen. He had been heard. His truth had been recognized. The bailiff approached, unlocking the cuffs from Marcus's wrists. The sound of the chains falling onto the table echoed like freedom itself. Marcus flexed his hand slowly, the red marks on his skin fading as the metal was removed. He stood tall, taller than ever, his dignity restored. Reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. "Mr. Daniels, how do you feel? What do you have to say to the jury? Do you think justice was served?" But Marcus didn't rush to answer. Instead, he looked around the courtroom, at the jury who had chosen to believe him, at his lawyer who had fought for him, at the veterans who had shown up to support him, and finally at the general who stood in the back, arms crossed, a proud nod on his face. When Marcus finally spoke, his words weren't for the cameras. They were for everyone who could hear. "I didn't stand up for that boy in the store because I'm a Marine," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I stood up for him because it was the right thing to do. Being a Marine didn't make me do it. Being a man, a human being, did. That's what service means. That's what courage means. It doesn't stop when you take off a uniform. It doesn't stop when the battle is over. It follows you wherever you go, because protecting others is never the wrong choice." The room erupted again, louder than before. Outside, The courthouse steps looked like a parade ground. Crowds had gathered, holding flags, banners, and signs with Marcus's name. Veterans saluted as he walked down the stairs. Civilians cheered, and children on their parents' shoulders pointed at him like he was larger than life. Cameras flashed nonstop, capturing every second. For Marcus, though, the most powerful moment wasn't the cheers. It was a small figure pushing through the crowd, the teenager from the store. The boy's eyes were filled with guilt and gratitude. He stood before Marcus, trembling, and whispered, "I'm sorry I ran. Thank you for protecting me." Marcus placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "You don't need to apologize. Just promise me you'll protect someone else someday when they need it." The boy nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. The image of Marcus walking free, surrounded by supporters, with the general saluting him once more on the courthouse steps, spread across the nation within hours. News outlets replayed the footage endlessly. Social media called it the salute heard around the world. Commentators debated what it meant for justice, for veterans, for the way society treated its heroes. But for Marcus, it wasn't about the headlines. It was about something deeper. That night, back in his own home for the first time since the arrest, he sat quietly on his porch, staring at the stars. His body was free, but his mind wrestled with questions. He had served his country faithfully, yet one misunderstanding had nearly destroyed his life. If not for the general, for the jury's final decision, things could have ended very differently. Still, he refused to let bitterness take root. Instead, he saw it as a reminder that the fight for justice wasn't always on foreign soil. Sometimes it was right here, at home, and just as he had never given up on the battlefield, he would not give up on his country now. In the days that followed, Marcus became more than a local hero. He became a national symbol of resilience and integrity. Schools invited him to speak. Veterans groups rallied behind him. Politicians used his story as a call to honor and support those who served. But Marcus kept his message simple. At every podium, in every interview, he repeated the same words. Service isn't about medals. It isn't about uniforms. It's about standing up when someone needs you. It's about doing the right thing, even if no one claps, even if no one notices. Heroes aren't born on battlefields. They're born in moments of choice. Years later, people still remember the story. Not just the arrest, not just the trial, but the salute. That single gesture had pierced through prejudice, fear, and misunderstanding, reminding the world what honor looked like. And for Marcus Daniels, the legacy wasn't the courtroom, the verdict, or even the applause. His legacy was simple. He had lived true to his oath, not just as a Marine, but as a man. Because heroes don't just wear medals. They stand tall even in chains.